The trial proceeded dramatically. At the final judgment in May 1917, the court pronounced the defendant guilty and responsible. The punishment, death by hanging. 4 days after the verdict, Einstein conducted an interview in the L5CH4 Zeitung. It appeared in the morning edition of 23 May 1917, page 2. Friedrich Adler as physicist, a discussion with Albert Einstein. Undeterred either by the sentence or the broader wartime repression that might have affected him, Einstein declared Friedrich Adler to be a clear thinker, someone who acted objectively and selflessly in his life as well as in his studies. Einstein related how years before, Adler had sacrificed his own excellent chance to land the University of Zurich professorship, even though it was an existential necessity for Adler that he get it. Einstein did not mention that he, Einstein, had been the successful competitor. Adler's work in physics, Einstein continued, consisted in the development of the Machian point of view, and Einstein explained, doing so with the conviction that there would always be a simplest frame of reference through which to describe the world, the center of mass. Einstein disagreed. Meanwhile, Adler's execution was put off under political pressure. He was transferred to the fortress at Stein on the Danube, where he was to serve hard time in solitary confinement. On 6 July 1918, he once again wrote Einstein, "Dear friend, it has been almost 1 year since I wrote you, but I've been thinking of you incessantly, for I was occupied the whole time with relativity theory. I know that you are so convinced of the correctness of your foundations that you do not expect anything from further discussions of it. And yet, I would like to burden you with the perusal of my book, for I imagine now having really caught Ariadne's thread, leading to a compelling derivation of the necessity for a preferred reference system from your transformation equations. Simple diet, good air, quiet solitude, death row agreed with him. In virtually all respects, I am doing better here than in Vienna. In short, in this topsy-turvy world we now live in, it is in actual fact considerably nicer intramuros than extra." Einstein fired back a detailed response on 4 August 1918 that argued this way. At the root of all that Adler had done, according to Einstein, lay 2 crucial assumptions. First, that no Lorentz deformation of rigid bodies could take place, and B, that no influence of motion on the running rate of clocks would take place. The first assumption, that Lorentz contractions didn't take place, leads to Marx-Abraham's motion of an electron, and therefore was in trouble with electron deflection experiments. So the ether, as he considered for various reasons, was neither in motion nor at rest. Einstein insisted that facts like these, which compelled the formulation of the special theory of relativity, and Adler had not addressed these constraints at all, neither the Michelson-Morley experiment nor the Fizeau experiment, which showed that the ether couldn't be dragged at a rate that would make the experiments understandable. Adler argued that inequalities in the running rate of clocks could be due either to their mechanism or to the partition of their dials. Einstein's sharp tongue, otherwise held in check in correspondence with Adler, finally let loose. "The dial is a bit odd," he wrote to Adler. "Why not the handle and the polish?" We imagine my standard clocks as having been produced identically somewhere, in some time, by a clockmaker who enjoys a world monopoly, and then having been brought to the different locations and into the states of motion of the various locations. Back to Adler's salvo of 20 September 1918 against Einstein. The upriver theorist turned to clocks and the twin paradox, as it came to be called. I've been making a serious effort for a year now to understand it, but an insurmountable logical contradiction in your assertion remains for me. Adler: one twin rotates the Earth, comes back, and the other remains still. Each looks the same to the other, yet the clocks are supposed to be different. Einstein stands his ground. Einstein: only if the 2 perspectives, the 2 frames of reference, one in the orbiting platform, the other at the stationary one, were both acceleration free, would there be a problem with special relativity. Only when general relativity is taken as a basis are both frames of reference truly equivalent. In this case, the difference in the rates of the clocks is explained by the combined effects of the influence of the velocity and the gravitational potential, the red and blue shift that we've discussed. No contradiction. Then Adler took his best shot. He imagined 2 meter-long C-clamps, one that had a battery in it and 2 posts at opposite ends, and the other with a meter on it with posts at either end. So they could fit together, and when they did, the meter would deflect. Then Adler said, imagine that you take the point of view of the battery C-clamp. Then the meter C-clamp would come along and look shrunk, so it would fit between the 2 posts and the meter couldn't possibly deflect. On the other hand, if you took the point of view of the C-clamp with a meter on it, then the battery C-clamp would look to have shrunk, and so when they crossed, they wouldn't touch either, and the meter would not deflect. But suppose, Adler said, you took the point of view where they're each coming towards you at equal and opposite speeds, then they would touch, and the meter would deflect. So Adler said, look here, Einstein, the meter can't both deflect and not deflect, depending on which frame you're in. It either deflects or it doesn't. Adler, relativity is smashed. The galvanometer will say that the 2 relativity theorists, both Einstein and Lorentz, are wrong, that neither of the 2 slabs has really contracted. Bang! Einstein's relativity theory, according to Adler, is dead. This time, Adler's target did not drop. Einstein, your bias for absolute time or for the instantaneous signal is exposing itself, Einstein replied. Under no circumstance will a current flow if the contacts made are so brief that their duration is small compared with the time it takes for light or an electrical wave to connect the 2 poles. Neglecting the necessity of keeping contact long enough for light to make the crossing is in principle at the heart of the problem. But making the contacts last longer, so this condition is fulfilled in the symmetry frame, turns out to ensure that the galvanometer deflects in all the moving frames. No contradiction. Einstein liked this putative counterexample so much that he wrote a new and related one for Adler, illustrating again how the relativity of simultaneity resolved a paradox, and he even considered including Adler's galvanometer example in the dialogue he was writing between an anti-relativity critic, criticus, and relativist. The whole was to be modeled on Galileo's dialogue of 2 world systems, and Einstein, in fact, made it and published it as a play in October of 1918.